Hey guys, welcome back. This week we are going to tackle a very important topic. I feel like a lot of people will get stuck in this sometimes, and we're going to talk about narcissism. We're going to talk about why this person can just really never admit that they were wrong, why they can't own it, why they're just deflecting constantly. And I feel like a lot of victims of narcissistic abuse can really get caught up in this cycle because it's like beating your head against a brick wall. You just want the recognition. You want this person to own it. You want the apology. You even perhaps might even want this person to change and to do something different next time. Unfortunately, it's just not really going to happen because there's so many things that need to happen within this person in order for them to be accountable. And really, that's the biggest thing here is this person does not know how to be accountable for their actions. They don't want to. They don't know how to. There's just so much deep-rooted shame and insecurity and low self-esteem for them to be able to really own what they do. When you own something, when you can admit that you did something wrong, that means that there's no excuse, that you're not blaming someone else. It means that you accept that you're a human being and that you did something that maybe you wouldn't do again. Maybe you didn't realize the impact of what you said or what you did and how that would really hurt someone in the way that it did. So there's never any manipulation that shows up. There's never any deflecting that shows up. There's no any of that. You can just own it. Now, we can't all sit on our high horses and just say that we have done this every single time as well when we did something wrong. So either you did something and you didn't think it was hurtful, but the person in front of you thought it was hurtful, and so you kind of just downplayed it or deflected or just was going toe-to-toe with this person, trying to make them feel that they shouldn't be upset or hurt by what it is that you did or said versus validating that person's feelings. Or maybe, you can actually see that, yes, what I did was hurtful, but it makes you feel uncomfortable that you actually hurt someone. And again, you can become a little defensive and not really wanting to own your part. The difference between the average person that's just a victim to this every now and then versus someone who's narcissistic is really about emotional maturity. And it's also about that empathy piece that you always hear so much about. So if you're not narcissistic, but you're just emotionally immature, which means that you don't know how to soothe yourself when you do something that's hurtful. When we do something that's wrong, if we don't know how to soothe ourselves, then there's going to be so much shame that ends up getting built within us when we have done something that we probably shouldn't have. And so me being able to forgive myself means that I accept that I'm a human being and that I make mistakes. And because I made this mistake doesn't define me, doesn't mean I'm a bad person, doesn't mean I'm a horrible person. I have to learn from it and I have to accept it. So all of that right there, that's something that you learn how to do growing up. And you learn to forgive yourself just like you would learn to forgive someone else for a mistake that they made. So when you can't offer forgiveness, you also can't forgive yourself. Now, with taking full responsibility for something, a really big part of this is role modeling. Did you have the role models growing up of healthy adults that when they did something wrong, that they owned it? I know a lot of older generations, that wasn't something that was done. You never heard a parent apologizing to a child for yelling at them when it wasn't really about them. It was about the parent, and that maybe the parent was stressed or hungry or tired or whatever. The parenting just really involved getting upset with children when they were hungry or tired and acted in a certain way, but the adults never really owned their part. If you didn't have good role modeling of people that when they did mess up, that they owned it, and if you didn't see that, it's not something that you're ever going to learn how to do. If you had enabling parents that never really held you accountable for when you did do something, that they just enabled bad behavior, maybe you were the golden child, maybe you were raised by a narcissistic mother or a father, if you weren't taught how to own something and it didn't make you a bad person, you were taught how to work through any guilt that you were having because of something that you did, and that you were shown unconditional love regardless of what you did or said that might have hurt someone. If you didn't have that type of upbringing where those things were demonstrated and modeled, you're not going to know how to do this. Now, put on top of that, just having a personality disorder in general. So the average person that will deflect or manipulate or not really own something that they did, become defensive, that person still has that empathy piece, which means that there's still a part of them that knows I did something wrong, but I can't go there. Like I can't go there. Maybe it's the ego, maybe it's that defensiveness. Who knows? Maybe it's that inability to soothe themselves. Because that's there, the average person won't be able to own it, won't be able to admit when they do something wrong. When you're dealing with a personality disorder, there is no empathy piece there. They really believe that they were entitled to do this. One of the biggest things with empathy and learning how to teach a child empathy is done through communication. If any of your parents were narcissistic, then this is going to be really hard to do because you're being bred with that narcissism. So maybe with a narcissistic parent, you saw that lack of accountability that they had in themselves when they did something wrong. So with empathy and teaching this and teaching kindness and teaching being able to see past what's happening so you can understand a person and why they felt the way they felt, that's something that you're taught, and you're either taught it or you're not. And if you're not taught how to do that, it's going to be even harder for you to become an adult to be able to own when you did something wrong, because you're not going to really think that you did anything wrong, because the world revolves around you and what you need and how you feel. And that mentality, that mindset is either because you were raised by narcissistic parents and so that was just, a breed that you took on, or you were never really taught how to think of anyone else but yourself. If you're not taught how to think of someone else other than yourself, then you can't see someone else's viewpoint. You are just consumed with how that made you feel. So a very big part of parenting is that communication, is that dialogue, to break something down so you can see different perspectives in order for you to do something different, see something different, look at something different, and create a new habit. And we're talking about how you're raised. So if none of those things are happening, you're going to be a person that's either just going to live emotionally an immature adult life where it's always about me, even though I do feel that intuition, I do feel that little bit of empathy, I do understand that what I did was wrong. You're going to struggle with your ego and your defensiveness to be able to actually own it. You're going to have so much shame, so much guilt that keeps getting piled up on top of you that you're never going to be able to just sit in the fact that, I made a mistake and I was human. When empathy isn't taught, selfishness really just takes its place. You might see someone who's narcissistic show some sort of remorse. You might see the regret. You might see a little bit of the sadness. You might even see them cry. You might see that emotion show up. They're not inhuman. You will know that they did something wrong, but the difference is that they are going to, when those uncomfortable feelings come, because they don't know what to do with them, they're going to just suppress them. When those feelings come up, what's right at the top is guilt and shame. And if you don't know how to deal with guilt and shame, you're going to suppress them or convince yourself that there was a reason why you did it. And again, that reason is me, my selfishness, or what I feel like I'm entitled to, or what I deserve. And so you're going to keep repeating that over and over to yourself until eventually you just believe it. So a big reason why this person can never admit that they're wrong is the guilt and the shame. Of course, yes, the lack of empathy, but the lack of empathy comes from just not taking accountability. Most people can understand black and white that they actually did something wrong. They're not above not knowing that they did something wrong. It's that guilt and shame that comes up that they don't know how to deal with it. So when you and I feel guilt or shame, for the most part, yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, we don't like it, but we don't believe the stories that are attached to the guilt and shame to be absolute truth. I think what most people don't realize is that the minute you own it, there's actually this weight that's just lifted. And when you apologize and then even try to make it right, when you're dealing with a healthy person in front of you, you get compassion from that person. And number one, it will allow us to connect on a deeper level. But number two, it'll allow me to feel acceptance that not only just for myself and forgiving myself, which is hugely important, but I'll also get it from you. So I start to feel that unconditional love from you that, yes, I made a mistake and I'm owning it and I'm human. So you start to feel that connection that you have with that person. It's not really going to happen here. It's not going to happen because the person doesn't want to connect emotionally really on these deep levels with anyone because they fear you leaving them. Narcissism, a big reason for it is this severe fear of abandonment that happens within this personality disorder. Unfortunately, a lot of the time they will feel remorse, they'll feel some sadness, but usually this remorse has to more so do with how it is affecting them, that they're now not getting something out of this equation that maybe they once had that they possibly enjoyed, whether it was you looking at them in a certain way, whether it was time, whether it was money, whether it was a favor, whatever it is. The remorse comes from them not getting something now. The remorse doesn't really have anything to do with feeling wholeheartedly sorry for what it is that they did to you, and more so has to do with how this situation is now making them feel. So you're never going to get, so let's just kind of summarize this for a second. If you can't get accountability out of someone, and we understand now why that's not going to happen, you're never going to get an apology. You're never going to hear I'm sorry, because before you can even say I'm sorry, you have to be able to be accountable. You have to have been able to do step one in its entirety for you to come to the table and say, I'm sorry. Now, if I can't do step one and I can't do step two, you're not getting an apology, you think an action, you think behavior is going to be different? No, it's going to be the same thing. I mean, you can't even look at three. You can't even look at this person changing absolutely whatsoever, because nothing needs to change, because I'm not owning it. Well, I'm not apologizing, and I'm not owning it, and I'm not going to take responsibility, and I can't be accountable because I don't know how to, because I'm that deeply wounded and insecure that I don't even know how to go there. I'm just so immature. I don't even have the software downloaded in here in order for me to kind of start this process. Now, if you want this person to change, it's because you haven't really accepted who they actually are. If you need the I'm sorry, really that's your ego talking. And if you need this person to be accountable, it's because you want them to be different. You want the situation to be different, and you're not really accepting who they are and what they're capable of doing. And don't get me wrong, none of that is easy to do. It's a process. You're not going to just see a little bit of consistent behavior and say, okay, I finally accept who you are. No, unfortunately, it takes sometimes getting the door slammed in our face in order for us to really get it. Like, okay, I get it. This person's not going to change. This is who this person is. And you have to grieve that, and you have to mourn that, and you have to deal with that, and you have to accept that. And all of that is a process, and it just takes time sometimes, especially when you're dealing with people in your life that you have an expectation on. I have an expectation as you, as my mother, as my father, as my brother, as my husband, as my girlfriend, that you should be like this. And the expectation is fine because that's your standard, but you have to be able to see whether or not someone can actually rise to the occasion and meet you at that standard. Now, that doesn't mean that you lower the bar. You just keep the bar where it is. You accept the situation, or you accept the person. And if you really still want them in your life, the only thing that's going to change is either you changing what you expect out of this person, or you setting up more boundaries with this person so they will have no choice but to alter their behavior slightly. They're never going to be who you want them to be, but a situation can get better if you have better boundaries. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this week's video. I hope it gave you some great tips. I hope it educated you, and I hope it really helped you during this time if you are struggling with this stuff. So again, guys, thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you next week.